Hello and welcome to the home of the Ghost Owl, and yes, we're continuing with our Warhammer The Old World content. We have the rulebook. I still do not have any other pieces of my pre-order, just the main rulebook right now. And we're going to start going through the rulebook from pretty much start to finish from the rules section, completing our overall look at Warhammer The Old World release with the faction focuses and then coming back to the lore. But for the next part of the series, we're going to be focusing on the rules part of the rulebook. Now, at the beginning, this is obviously going to be very much more tailored towards those who are either new to tabletop war games. Maybe you've been playing Total Warhammer video game and you want to get into the tabletop, or maybe you're new to Rank and Flank. But as we go through the rules, then they get more detailed. I'm sure it will then prove more beneficial to those of you who are more experienced in Warhammer games overall, and particularly Warhammer Fantasy Battle. Maybe you'll find a few gems in here, or maybe some slight differences in these early episodes. Okay, so where we're going to start first up is we're going to be looking at the general principles part of the rulebook. So first off, you've got mustering forces. So ideally, I recommend that you do this in advance. Agree with your opponent how many points you want your game to be, and doing that reasonably well in advance, if you can, is the best way. I think, certainly for me, I think the average games are going to be around about 2,000 points, and if I was going to go to a local game club or a store, I'd be looking to take a 2,000 point army, which I think is going to represent around about 2 to 3 hours game time, good enough for an evening, and then maybe I'll be doing sort of a 3,000 point game once a month. But that's going to be significantly longer in terms of game length. Now, Warhammer Fantasy Battle didn't scale very well at low points values, and I expect the old world to be the same in that regard, and I certainly don't expect to be playing games lower than 1,500 points, but that in reality is pretty much what a battalion box is about, 1250, plus a monster with a character or an elite infantry / cavalry unit. You're probably there at 1,500 points, so I don't think that's going to be too far away for most. In terms of scenario, yes, you need to choose your scenario next. Now, match play pitched battles are going to be the default when going for a pickup game. However, if you are playing with your mates, people you know, don't forget those narrative and campaign battles. They can also be great fun, and they can also allow for more choice and flexibility when it comes to choosing your armies. It means you'd have to go a little bit less meta. Maybe somebody can go very narrative, and you can give them a little more points than you have to kind of balance the forces out, or choose a scenario that maybe favours a weaker force. Maybe you've got more choice in units than your opponent, so your opponent's pretty much stuck with what he's got. Might not be the best army in the world, but he can still have fun, and you can still make it a reasonably close game, because nobody really wants games where you get tabled in 2 to 3 turns, right? So don't forget those narrative and campaign battles, but match play pitch battles will be the default, certainly for those pickup games. In terms of setting up the battlefield, as in having a place to play on, I personally use 3 2-foot by 4-foot MDF boards, essentially to make my kitchen table bigger. That gives me a 6-foot by 4-foot playing surface. And then I cover the back of each of those boards with felt, using PVA glue to glue it underneath, and that just protects the table from any damage. And then after you finish, of course, you can just pick those 3 boards up. They're quite small, and you can pretty much stack them wherever, whether you've got a garage or some type of outbuilding, or whether you can even put it at the back of a wardrobe. They do go away pretty easily. And then in terms of covering that, I really like game mats. Personally, and there are others available, I have game mats from Game Mat EU and Deep Cut Studio. Both are very good in terms of quality, in terms of detail. I really like the double-sided ones, obviously, though they do come a bit more expensive. And there will be links below for those two in the description. However, they're not the only ones available. There are plenty of other options out there in terms of game mats or playing surfaces. I just particularly like those, and I do like that mouse mat neoprene style material. It doesn't crease, it's very easy to roll up, and it seems to be quite durable. In terms of deployment, just a tip there. To make deployment go smoother and quicker, I like to mark out the deployment area with dice. Some people I see, they're measuring every single unit. If you just mark out that deployment area in dice, you know that you can put your units within that box, right? So it just makes it a little bit quicker and a little bit flow. And I think it gives you a little bit more perspective on the battlefield because you can see where your deployment area is, especially on those ones where you have kind of like an angled deployment and so on. Then you fight the battle, and then you're into the aftermath where you're recording the results. Now, in terms of if you are playing campaigns, just make sure you've got paper or some type of electronic notepad, in particular where you're playing those campaigns in which you need to know which units or characters survived is always useful. So, other general principles of playing the game, take-backs and changing one's mind. Outside of tournaments, in my mind, this should always be allowed. We all make mistakes. We all do things where you go, oh, I didn't mean to do that. Obviously, if you've already been rolling the dice, that becomes a little bit more difficult because then you're going, maybe the person's taking back just because they rolled bad. But in terms of moving unit, going, oh, I didn't mean to move it there before dice are rolled and so on, should be allowed. And also things out of phase as well. The amount of times I've played games, particularly casual games where I've got, a beer in one hand and a tape measure in the other, you forget to cast an enhancement spell or a buff spell or whatever, and you go, oh, I just like to cast that I should have cast it in the strategy phase. I'm in the movement phase. Please can I cast it? Yeah, generally, I think that should be allowed. So it just makes the games a bit more friendly, nice to play. Obviously, this is outside of a tournament environment. Now, in terms of moving through units, only fleeing or flying units can go through a unit. So obviously you're fleeing, you're kind of just streaming through, running through the unit, and if you're flying, you go over it. That is the only time you can physically move your unit through another one. In terms of measurement, tape measures, you can pretty much find them for a good price on Amazon or any hardware store, as well as Warhammer if you want a Warhammer specific one. Ideally, make sure it does have a lock. There's nothing worse than trying to hold that tape measure out with your fingers to get the right measurement. So, a good quality tape measure, still not that expensive, say from a hardware store. You can get it with a lock, keep it in place. But also don't go too large. I've seen some people play with these enormous metal tape measures that are really designed for builders and DIY and stuff like that. They're just unwieldy on the table. Plus, if you drop a big heavy tape measure like that, you're probably going to destroy someone's models or the terrain. So try not to go crazy big with your tape measures. In terms of target number rolls, in this game, 4+ means equal to or above the number stated. So if you roll a 4 on the dice or more, that would be a target number roll. If you have to modify your dice for any reason, i.e. divide it or subtract it or whatever, fractions are always rounded up. So if you end up dividing a dice, you've rolled a 5 and you then divide it by 2, that's 2.5. You always round up to 3. Unless it specifies otherwise, so I haven't seen anything that does that. Also, in terms of re-rolls, a dice can only be re-rolled once, even if there are multiple rules that affect it that could allow it to re-roll and re-roll for a different roll. You can only re-roll it once. And if you're doing multiple dice rolls, so for a leadership check, for example, where you're rolling 2 dice and you want to re-roll them for whatever reason, you have to re-roll all the dice. You can't just keep the 1 and re-roll the 6. You have to roll them all. And then any unresolved issues, ideally the best way is if you're playing at home, it should just be a very easy chat with your mate. If you're at a gaming club though, or you're playing with somebody you don't know, there's generally plenty of other people around. Find a third party. It takes a few seconds to explain the situation, have them take a look, and for them to make a decision. It's the fairest way to do it, and many people are happy to do this. But in the event of that's not available, or you've got clearly conflicting rules, i.e. main rule book with faction rules have in the past been conflicting, just do a roll off. It's the best, quickest and fairest solution. And finally, templates. You can see the templates here that come in the starter box. multiple sources to get templates. You can even make your own through scanning the template page in the rulebook and then using some card. However, ideally, the best way is make sure it's solid. You can see the GW ones here, they're a solid plastic material, stops them flexing, makes them much easier to use. And ideally, you can see even the Games Workshop ones, they're not quite as see-through as I'd like, but having them see-through makes them so much easier to use, and then count the miniatures under the template. It's just all about ease of use. And making your life easier. So there you go. That brings us just to the end. It's just a short video as kind of an introductory to the rulebook, some general principles before we start getting into the more nitty-gritty details. Hopefully you found this video useful. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Let me know why in the comments down below. And also in those comments down below, if anyone else has got any tips in these sort of general principles of playing a game, it'd be great if you could put your comments down there and share them with everybody else. If you want to see more content though, please hit that subscribe button. It is totally free for you to do, and it means a huge amount for me. So thank you for that in advance, and I really do appreciate all those who have supported me so far. You've been watching The Ghost Owl. I'll see you all very soon.